Powered by Jolly Ranchers.
Thank everyone for bearing with us while we get ready for the next phase here. I understand that the applicant has one more new witness we haven't heard from yet. You'd like to call?
That's correct. Yes, I'd like to call Gordon Pellegrini.
Pellegrini?
Pellegrini, yes.
Pellegrini. You can step up.
He needs to be sworn in.
Raise your right hand. State your name.
Gordon Pellegrini.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
Before I start with my question, I've got a document I want to hand up to the board. This is the trade document. Around with the front, we've got some more. Would you state your name for the record, please? No, it's not on.
Gordon Pellegrini. A little too close.
Okay, mine's on too. Okay, can you tell us how you're employed and how long you worked where you work now?
I'm a commercial real estate appraiser. I work as an independent contractor, and currently I work with BRB Appraisal in Hendersonville. I've been there for 2 years.
Okay, and have you worked in other places before then?
I have.
Okay, and could you describe those other positions?
I've worked at 3 other commercial valuation companies. Most recently was BDO in New York City, and 2 other commercial appraisal valuation companies before that.
And so, do you do you possess any licenses or certifications to work in to do what you do in North Carolina?
Yes, I'm licensed in North Carolina and also 4 other states.
Okay. And did you prepare the market analysis dated October 10th, 2019 that's been submitted as an exhibit in this matter?
I did.
Okay. Would you briefly describe your training and experience?
Yes, so I have a BA in Business Administration from Franklin Marshall College, and related to my real estate experience, I have 1,000+ hours in continuing and certifying education in commercial valuation work. I've appraised several hundred commercial properties, many of them multifamily. I've worked with 5 different MAIs across several different companies, and I'm licensed in 5 different states.
At this time, Mr. Chairman, we would tender Mr. Pellegrini as an expert in the field of real estate market valuation and analysis.
No objection.
He's so admitted and so tendered and so admitted.
Thank you. Now you said that you prepared this market analysis dated October 10th, 2019.
I did.
Okay. Would you briefly describe what process you undertook to perform this analysis?
Yeah, so the scope of my work was to determine whether there was a detriment to property value as a result of a large-scale apartment development like this. And so what I did was I researched similar apartment developments that were constructed in Asheville over the last 5 years, and I took sales data 2 years prior to the construction of the developments and 2 years after the construction of the developments within a 1-mile radius. And in almost every case, there was either no detriment to the value or an increase in the value. And furthermore, to make sure I wasn't operating in a bubble, I did the same thing for the census tract, which is an area farther away from these apartment developments, to make sure that perhaps real estate values, residential real estate values, were greater than the areas near these developments. But in that case, it was a similar finding. All of the real estate values close to the developments were higher in every case.
Okay. Is there? You may have said this and I missed it. Did you look at other properties? What are known as comparables?
I did.
Okay. So Based on the information assumptions contained in your analysis and the methodology used by you, do you have an opinion as to whether the proposed crossroads development will have an effect on the value of property adjacent to and in the area of, in the neighborhood of the proposed development?
I do. I do.
And what is that opinion?
My opinion is that there will be no detriment to value, if not an increase in value.
And do you have an opinion as to whether the proposed development will be injurious to property or public improvements in the neighborhood, as far as the value of it?
No, not that my research could tell.
At this point, I have no further questions, Mr. Pellegrini. And that,
Are you reserving your right to ask all the questions at once for all the witnesses, or did you want to address this one specifically?
I think I'll wait on this, but reserve my right. If this is the last witness, I think we'll just go back through. Yep.
Thank you.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Mr. Chairman, at that time, at this time, this concludes our, the presentation of our case, and I would like to, our case in chief. We'll have a closing at the after the public hearing is over. But I would also. But I would.
Can you just raise your hand, ma'am, please?
But at this time, I would offer into evidence the application that was prepared, and all the attachments to it, the traffic impact analysis, the appraisal, and the presentation materials that were given to you at the beginning of the meeting.
So, as to the traffic impact analysis, the application, the exhibits attached there too, I believe those are admitted thus far. With respect to what was the contents of this manila folder, is that something you're seeking to introduce as well?
That's correct, and that includes the conditions that we've offered. It also includes some letters. Mr. Newer and I have talked about this. We believe that that most, if not all of the folks who wrote those letters are here and can testify as to them during public comment.
I'll go ahead. I have a couple thoughts, but I imagine that opposing counsel wants to be heard.
We would object to the letters, again, for the same basis. These are unsworn letters. They are not.
Okay, so let's address them one at a time, if you don't mind, just so there's complete transparency here. I'm going to go through the contents of the manila folder. The first one I have is a document that's labeled Catalyst Capital Partners.
Correct.
Okay. Does opposing counsel want to be heard as to that document?
There's no objection to the Catalyst Capital Partners document. And I have exhibit stickers if it would be helpful to the chair to label for labeling purposes, or.
Is that acceptable so we can keep order of them?
That'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Has that covered?
Okay, excellent. Do you want to, Josh, if you don't mind, can we kind of keep a running track out loud of which exhibits are which? This one, I believe we're on Exhibit C before, but what is
So
this?
this actually will, we have this label, this is the appraisal, labeled Exhibit C. So this will become Exhibit D.
You said C, you said D?
The appraisal, we've labeled as Exhibit C.
Okay,
And so the document entitled Catalyst Capital Partners and the concern.
D, okay. And there's no objection to Exhibit D.
No objection to Exhibit D.
The next one I have is a letter that appears to be from Samantha Cole, Asheville Area Chamber of Commerce. Does either party want to be heard on that?
We would object to this letter. Is Ms. Cole here? Yes. Okay. The letter is not sworn. It's not competent evidence in this type of tribunal. If Ms. Cole wants to testify, we're happy for her to do that if called. But I also, in reading through this letter, don't think that it has any relevancy to the conditions that the board has to consider in granting the permit. It's in general just a statement of support for the project.
So Yes.
Mr. Chair, I can shortcut this and suggest that that as these folks come forward, as we expect them to do during public comment, that if they want to offer their letters up at that time, they'll do it that way.
Okay. Then probably the same for the SIBO. And
the church.
what else am I missing? Keith Webb. Is he present?
The church.
Yeah. I have Chambers next. Is that right? Okay, he's present as well. And then this is the Exhibit A, conditions offered, which is already in. You're not substantively offering the memorandum of law, right? That's just kind of an advisory piece.
That's correct.
Okay. I would go ahead and just make a note to ourselves to read that prior to making a decision. I think that's due the appropriate way to, after we read it. Which brings us to this document. Crossroads at West Asheville, public hearing presentation. Opposing counsel, do you want to start with? Any thoughts on that?
Is this what you're referring to?
Yes.
I don't have an objection to this being admitted.
To any of it?
No, I'm fine with the contents in total, as to it being admitted.
Okay. All right, so we'll make that one
Exhibit E,
Exhibit E.
and I do not have a copy of that document in that format.
Mr. Chairman, the only other item I saw was the conditions offered. I don't know if you did anything with that or not.
I did not yet. This is listed as Exhibit A, but I imagine that's just for your records, is that correct? This document?
Yeah, it was actually Exhibit A to something else, but it would be appropriate to label that Exhibit F.
Okay. Counsel, do you have any objection to that being offered into evidence?
Not being offered into evidence, yeah, I don't have an objection for the conditions.
Are we good on that, Mr. Freeman? Thank you, Mr. Freer. I have us at A through F. All right. And we can readdress the letters at the appropriate time. Just give me a heads up when you reach that point. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Exhibit A, the memorandum that was attached to, might have gotten lost in the shuffle. There's a copy of it here.
Were you intending that to be included?
That was my transmittal memorandum. Yes, for what it's worth.
I don't know that I've seen that.
We can keep that
we see
attached.
that? We haven't seen that transmittal.
You have an extra copy of that memorandum? If not, I can give you mine.
Josh, that's
Yeah.
give it.
Multiple copies, and you can get that.
Was it put out with public documents? It was available online? Mr. Chair, that document wasn't made available online.
The memorandum?
Yes.
I don't think we can admit that in evidence anyway. But if you don't mind leaving a copy, I guess, in a publicly accessible area, to the extent that the community is interested in further confusion, they can read to their heart's content. I imagine the board will probably be more accustomed to actually doing something with that. All right, any other housekeeping matters prior to me giving them?
May I make just one quick announcement?
Please.
Just for the public's benefit. The doors downstairs have been locked, so if you leave, you can come back in. We'll have staff downstairs, but just please be a little bit patient with us because those staff are also doing other things. So if you leave, you can come back. Doors are locked. Let your friends know if they're coming back. It may take a minute to get them inside, but we'll do so. Did everyone hear that? No. Okay. So the doors downstairs to this building have been locked because it's after 5 o'clock. You're welcome to come and go as you please. It just may take us a moment to get you back inside. So I just want to make you aware of that, that if you show up downstairs and one of my staff members is not present, they'll come back shortly. You might want to just knock on the door. So that's all, sir.
Thank you. Any housekeeping matters from the applicant prior to us moving forward?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Opposition?
To the extent that there's a question about this transmittal memorandum, we don't have an objection to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, in that case, Mr. Nor, do you want to commence by beginning your cross-examination of those witnesses?
Happy to. I'll start with Mr. Klink, AJ. This should be pretty brief. Just for clarification purposes, in the application, do you have a copy of your application with you?
I do not.
Josh wouldn't mind.
It'll take me just a moment.
For efficiency's sake, I'm going to give you wide latitude to ask questions we need, and with the understanding we're aiming to be efficient and try to avoid getting out of here too close to midnight. However, after that, I think we're going to I'm going to hold you guys to your P's and Q's here in terms of following all the evidentiary rules, not being duplicative in anything. I think we're going to have plenty of new information come out, but for the present time, I want to give you adequate space to ask what you need from these witnesses.
Do you have a copy of that application now, Mr. Klink?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and my question is pretty simple and straightforward. I just want to make sure we have a good understanding of ownership on this piece of property. On the front page of that application, forgive me as I pull this up myself, it lists as the owner on that application as Catalyst Capital Partners. Is that correct? On the application, does it say Catalyst Capital Partners as the owner?
Excuse me for 1 minute while I confer. That is what it says.
Okay. And is Catalyst Capital Partners the owner of the property at this point?
We have a contract on the properties.
Okay, so you have a contract to purchase the properties.
Mhm.
Okay, that's in effect as of today.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That was my question. I don't have any further questions for Mr. Klink at this time. My next one will be for Mr. Day. And that application, if you don't mind leaving that, because I think Chris may need that.
He said I did.
Okay.
Okay. So in that application for the conditional use permit, you have attached your response to that, correct? And I'm looking at the response from Civil Design Concepts titled Factors Relevant to Issuance of Conditional Use Permit.
And what date do you have for that?
The one I've got is revised 10/30/2019.
Okay, that's not the one you've provided me to look at. Let me grab
Okay.
it somewhere else.
Got it. Okay. And for that first paragraph there, this is related to these, and for the board's benefit, what I'm asking about, the responses that are provided here are related to the conditions the board has to consider in deciding whether to grant the permit or not. The first condition that's listed here is indicate how the CUP will not adversely affect health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed CUP. Is that an accurate reading of that sentence there, Mr. Day?
That is the question from the application,
That's
yes.
the question. And that corresponds with the county's conditional use permit ordinance as the first condition for the board to consider in these kind of cases, correct?
If you say so. It comes from the application, so that makes sense.
And your response to that is the proposed project will provide safe access, municipal water and sewer, storm water management, and outdoor amenities for proposed residents and businesses. Is that correct reading?
Correct.
Okay. And is that the, is there any other evidence? This is your response to that question. You've responded with indicating the access issues, the municipal water, sewer, stormwater management, and outdoor amenities as related to health and safety. Is there other evidence that you've provided to the board related to those areas?
I would say the presentation this afternoon.
What
in addition
specific
to that,
parts of that presentation would
the entire thing.
Okay. But what they've heard today and this sentence here.
Yes.
Okay. Have you done any other studies or analysis or related to the impact of the development on health and safety for those residing or working in the neighborhood that were submitted to the board?
Not that I can think of that we haven't discussed today.
Okay. Now, the surrounding areas, when we talk about the adjoining properties, what kind of uses are currently in place for the adjoining properties, if you're aware?
Could you clarify your question? What the surrounding areas is this?
Let's
What
say
are-
this adjoining property to the proposed development. What are the current uses, if you're aware?
As stated in the presentation earlier, I-26, the project is bordered to the south by I-26, and much of to the west would be, west and portions of the north would be the Crossroads Church and Hominy Creek, and to the north and east.
Is there any surrounding commercial use on the adjoining properties?
Beyond the church, the South Bear Creek, I know that there's some other, I've seen signs as I've driven through there, but I'm not familiar with the specifics of what those businesses or a step, looks beyond single-family homes on some of those.
But to your knowledge, the adjoining properties, you're not aware of any, adjoining meaning touching, surrounding, you're not aware of any commercial, are you?
I don't know how a church is defined as whether it's commercial. It's definitely not residential, so the church would be the other one.
Okay, but the church is the only one that you're aware of, if
Right.
it was to fit
That's
that.
That's the only use beyond the interstate and the creek.
Okay. Now, to also be clear, and this would be, forgive me. This would be slide 2, Josh. Slide 2 in our presentation. The Crossroads site plan in color. That's one. Thank you.
Would you like the clicker?
If it will, that would be great. Thank you. I just want, for clarity's purposes, this is the Crossroads site plan you submitted as part of the application and in your presentation today. Is that correct?
So the original site plan that my office prepared wasn't quite as pretty as that one. It's a little more black and white civil engineering drawing. This was a rendering done by the land planner involved with the project. It was provided to the county and the public as a part of this project.
Okay. And it is not the commitment, and I want to make sure it's clear, as a condition of this project, y'all are not proposing that we see a lot of trees, shrubs, everything. This is a conceptual you're not committing to this kind of buffering or landscaping on the property. Is that correct?
This is conceptual, and similarly, in the civil engineering plans that were done under my office's direction, we show a conceptual limits of disturbance for the site.
Okay. And it, because it doesn't show up on the TV, but in the lower left-hand corner of this slide is building 20. Do you follow me?
I'm not sure which one building 20 is, but give me
This
a
will be
second.
the self-storage building.
Oh, okay. I know exactly.
So
which
in
one.
the lower left-hand corner here.
The far west.
Far west, the last building right at the corner there, that's the self-storage building, correct?
Correct.
Yep. And across the street from that, that's residential properties, correct? To your knowledge?
I know there are some residential properties in that area. I think there's maybe, yeah, I'm not sure of all the uses out there besides residential. I know there's maybe an area, like a bed and breakfast style house out there. And then the RV park, but other than that, I'm not aware.
Have you proposed, as part of the conditions for this project, any limits on hours of operation for this particular use on the property in relationship to the residential properties that are on the other side of the road there?
Not at this point.
Okay. What, if any, anticipation do you have for the hours of operation for a self-storage unit complex?
I think it's open for conversation. It's not something that at this stage we have worked on. I've worked on multiple similar type storage units in the city and the county, which have complete hours that are not accessible, and some that are accessible after at all hours. And so those are typically with yeah. So I don't know if any for this one.
Okay. And at this point, if I may, Mr. Chair, I have packets, binders for the board that I think would be helpful in illustrating and following along. I've provided one to Bob. Bob, do you have a problem with me giving those to the board members for their use?
No, but I reserve a right to address the documents as they come up.
On the site plans that CDC, do you have a copy of your site plans? I can provide you
I do.
one. Okay. In those site plans, where do you identify adjoining low-rise buildings?
Clarify your question. We discussed that the adjoining properties were the church and the interstate and the creek. What are you referring to?
Well, I guess I'd be referring to, the properties for the proposed development, I'm referring to the adjoining, that'd be properties surrounding those two lots that have low-rise buildings on them. And the reason that I ask for is related to the condition standards, but I'm asking if where in your site plans those are identified or application.
I'm not aware of adjoining low-rise called out on the plans
Okay.
at this moment.
Did you look at any, as part of the application, any impacts that the development would have on adjoining low-rise buildings?
Typically, in a plan unit development, the great benefit of the county's plan unit development process is it allows us to take the available density and place it on the property in a way that makes the most sense. Very often, we're really trying to go right up to the property lines on things. This site, with its natural buffers and floodplain area, allowed us to set all of our buildings back at least 150 feet from any adjacent property line and beyond the storage unit building that we made reference to. And so further than that was the extent of our exploration of that.
So that was the extent of the analysis, was just knowing that because you're setting the buildings back from the property lines.
What I would consider a significant compared to other developments,
Okay.
yes.
But there's
Thank
no
you.
other analysis that was performed related to the impact on adjoining low-rise buildings?
No, only what was required in the checklist.
Okay. Did you conduct any light studies at this point in the project?
We have not created a lighting plan. Once this project moves into a detailed set of plans, a lighting and photometric plan will be required to meet the county's ordinance. But at this stage in the game, we've not put a lighting plan together, nor a study associated with that future lighting plan.
Which is why we don't see any lighting fixtures depicted on your site plans, correct?
Correct. That's
Okay.
that's a detail for the future of the plans. We are not proposing to ask for modifications from the county's lighting ordinance for this project, though.
With regards to the parking, the request for this development is that it be allowed to meet for the residential component 1.67 parking spaces per development unit, which is less than the 1.75 required under the ordinance. What analysis have you done and provided to the board related to the sufficiency of that measurement to meet the parking needs for the proposed use?
So as I stated earlier, what I've done is stated that we are only looking to lower that minimum as I don't feel here that we would that there's a need for it. We're looking to minimize built upon areas on the site where not needed, and by reducing that amount down, we have done that in the past on projects for the same reason, and it's allowed us not to have to build parking that wasn't needed.
I guess my question, though, was what analysis, if any, has been performed to justify that conclusion?
So the primary analysis would be looking at the uses that are on the site. For instance, some of the uses are proposed as senior housing, which typically and through ITE parking manuals don't need the level of parking associated with a single, like a apartment complex.
With regard to the height, you've indicated that you're asking for an additional 5 feet 8 inches in height on the buildings as part of your
We are.
project. And could the project have been accommodated simply by not having a fourth story?
So in the goals of laying this site out and trying to find ways for smart development, low impact development. Our goal was to place as much under the same roof as possible to limit built upon area. What we talked about with the design team and the developers was the fact that the Buncombe County CUP and PUD process allow that in the application for us to request that for those exact reasons.
But in this case, it is possible for you to meet the standard. You just can't have as many stories.
We could meet the standard, but we would have to modify the amount of preserved area on the site to do so.
Those are the questions I have at this point.
Mr. Chair, I would have some questions as well for this witness. Mr. Day, are you able to tell me how much impervious surface is going to be added to this site as a result of the project?
Not specifically.
Are you able to even estimate?
I don't have that number in front of me. It's not something that we have calculated specifically at this time.
So you do not know how much impervious surface you're going to be adding as a result of this project?
I know that we show proposed built upon area, which would be impervious surfaces, rooftops, and parking lots. I know that we have measured those. We have, as it's not a requirement of the checklist, it's not in the application or on the plans, but my team has, and myself in discussion, have looked at the amount of impervious surfaces so that we could adequately estimate the conceptual stormwater control measures that are shown on the site.
And those stormwater control measures, those are to comply with section 26362 of the county code?
They are to comply with the requirements to obtain a stormwater ordinance, a stormwater permit, and water quantity and quality. So I'm not sure of the specific section number.
Have you ascertained how much fill you're going to add in the floodplain on the project site?
So we have done some rough analysis to know that we are placing fill in the flood fringe of the site. I don't have that quantity to be able to provide. And I would also say that any quantity that we provide now is as I made reference, it's conceptual in nature, and the details of exactly how much fill goes in the floodplain will be determined as the plans move into construction level drawings.
I take it then that you have not performed a hydraulic riverine analysis of the likely impacts of the project?
No, at this point we don't have specifics. The plans that are prepared are not to a level that that a detailed study could be done.
Do you have your proposed conditions in front of you?
I'm going to have to ask for someone to provide those to me.
Oh.
I have a copy here that I'm going to assume is it is signed. Yeah.
Okay.
I do. Thank you.
I'm going to specifically be asking about subsection D titled Environmental Protection. I believe it's page 4.
Thank you.
Now, the way that number 5 is phrased, it says no encroachments, including fill, new construction, substantial improvements, and other developments shall be permitted within the floodway unless, and that continues on to subsection B, which talks about obtaining a conditional letter of map revision approved by FEMA. What is a conditional letter of map revision?
So I would clarify that it's actually a or statement in
Right.
number A. And so we have no problem with the fact that the project would have to do either a no-rise or a conditional letter of map revision.
Understood. I'm asking you specifically about that one option of a conditional letter of map revision. What is that?
So a conditional letter of map revision, to my knowledge, is a modification or adjustment to the maps.
And when you say the maps, you specifically mean the flood maps.
I do.
So as a result of these conditions, they would permit you to change the course of water in this floodway.
Can you clarify who "they" is?
The conditions?
No,
No.
you said that they would permit you to.
The conditions would permit you to redirect water such that it changes the floodway. Is that correct?
So there is a process associated with changing to making a map revision. There is also as even stated in the no-rise guidelines by the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, when we make modifications in here, we are requested to do a no-rise to that. As stated in this condition, if that's not available, then a certified letter of map revision would be required. That would be through the county, and I think the county could speak to more detail on what that process is.
I understand. And so as I read it, subsection A is that no rise option that you're talking about. But again, I'm going to ask you, under subsection B, would this project be allowed to redirect the current course of floodwater as a result of the project?
And my response would be that while in theory it could, it is a significant process and not as simple as just choosing B on the condition.
I understand that. I'm just trying to establish that this is an option that's open to you. Now, in the conditional letter of map revision process, is it accurate to state that one of FEMA's main concerns is whether you're going to impact or cause flooding to structures on the other side of the floodplain or within the floodplain?
That is not something I'm available to comment on.
We can address that through our own experts then.
Great.
No further questions for this witness.
Thank you. Any additional witnesses you wish to cross-examine Mr. Noor? For the public's benefit, I can let staff speak more to this, that we are here today to consider specific things under the ordinance within the purview of the Board of Adjustment. There are a lot of permits that would be required otherwise that are not even valid for us to consider or discuss. I'm allowing it to the extent that I think I can see the argument that you're going to make and giving you that leeway in the hopes that you're going to substantiate that with your expert. But going forward, at some point soon, we have to get to the part that the Board of Adjustment can actually decide, because we are not in charge of a lot of the connection to water, to be honest.
We would agree, and we're not asking the board to consider whether the permit should be granted or not in any way whatsoever. Our testimony and expert opinions will be related to whether injury will be caused on neighboring properties as a result of the development, not whether the permit should be granted or not.
Okay. Thank you.
I would like to, and I don't want to butcher Mr. Pellegrini. I had just a few questions for on the appraisal. Mr. Pellegrini, the definition you use in your report, your conclusion if I'm reading it right, and this is on the third page, is after a thorough analysis of residential real estate within proximity of apartment developments, we determined that there was no detriment to neighboring property value. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in that situation, I thought I heard you say your definition of neighborhood is within 1 mile?
Yeah, that was a radius that I felt like was relevant as far as what might be affected by something like this.
Okay. Would that be in 1 mile in any direction?
Yeah, radius, so a 1 mile radius.
Did you look at, in forming this opinion, did you look specifically at any of the adjoining properties to this development in assessing whether they would have an increase or decrease in property value?
No, it was just the same general concept was applied to looking at all of the comps, and I didn't specifically analyze any specific residences, no.
You did not look at any of the adjoining properties to this development, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And does this report at all factor in the effect specifically that traffic can have on adjoining property value?
I did look at the traffic impact analysis, but from reviewing it, the general idea I got was that the infrastructure to be put in as a result of the development would be sufficient to take care of any additional traffic. So that was something I considered, but didn't ultimately decide was going to affect property value.
Okay. And in your assessment, which of the comps you picked were located in existing residential communities like this?
They're all very similar. I mean, you can look at a map. There's a lot of residential real estate near many of them. So I couldn't specifically direct you to one in particular, but I would say that they're not very different as far as neighborhood goes.
So, my question was to be very specific. If you could identify which ones were in existing residential neighborhoods.
I would need some time to do that. I need to go back and look at the analysis again.
Okay. If I can have just one quick second. Just one quick question. I think this is page 12 of your report. And I'm reading the second sentence there. It says the valuation estimates and market or feasibility conclusions apply only to the property specifically identified and described in the ensuing report. Is that accurate reading of that sentence?
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. And when we flip back in your report, I think this is page 14. And I'm reading next to the line that says location. It says 20 South Bear Creek Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806, and then identifies the 2 parcel numbers. That's the address for the proposed development site, correct?
That's my understanding.
And again, on page 16, where it says identification of the property, we have again that same address, 20 South Bear Creek Road, Asheville, North Carolina, 28806, and the 2 PIN numbers associated with the development site, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in the qualification, and again, I want to turn back to, this is listed as the assumptions and limiting conditions of your report. It says that the valuation estimates and market or feasibility conclusions only apply to the property specifically identified, which is identified as 20 Bear Creek Road and is the project site. However, your opinion draws the very broad conclusion that you determined that there'd be no detriment to neighboring property values. So your report says it's limited to one piece of property in its assumptions and limitations, but your conclusions are well beyond that. So can you explain to us how? Well,
yeah, I mean, I would say that's your interpretation. My interpretation is that this is a market analysis of a specific property, and so that's what my assumption and limiting conditions are saying. And so my conclusions are based upon the effects of this development, this specific property would have on neighboring property value. And so that to me is sufficient in what I've described.
So, but as you said, this is a market analysis for this particular property, correct? The development site.
It's a market analysis on the effects of a development like this, yes.
Even though in your limitations, it says it only applies to the piece of property you identified.
I'm having a hard time understanding what, I mean, but the idea is that the market analysis is, it's research based on a development like this. So the concept was, will neighboring property value be affected by the Crossroads or West Asheville development? And my conclusion is that it won't be, based on the research that I've done, coming to this conclusion on this very specific property.
I don't have any other questions.
Thanks.
Do you have any inquiries of your own? Thank you.
Not at this time.
Thank you.
Mr. Edgerton, I didn't give you the opportunity. Did you want to ask Mr. Klink any questions?
No, in general, the city's questions are only going to pertain to flooding issues.
I don't have any other questions for cross-examination purposes.
Thank you. All right. I think we're probably going to power through to about 6 o'clock-ish, and we'll figure it out from there. You said you're essentially done with your case in chief at this point. Mr. Nord, would you like to begin with your first witness?
Yes, yes. I think it's important to lay out for the board what you're going to hear from us. This board has a very simple job to do. We started out with it at the beginning. Josh read it. Your job is to look at the conditions that the county commissioners have placed for conditional use permits and determine whether the applicant has proven that they meet each of those conditions. Okay? Sounds pretty simple, a little bit more difficult when you actually get into it. In particular, the evidence we're going to present is going to be related to, and I'm reading from the ordinance, and this is condition 1 and condition 2. Condition 1, and I'll just read it for you. The proposed use will not adversely affect the health or safety of persons residing or working in the neighborhood of the proposed use. They have to prove that their development will meet that standard. Number 2, the proposed use will not be detrimental to the welfare or injurious to property or public improvements in the neighborhood. They have to prove that's the case. What our evidence will show that's being presented through expert testimony, you're going to first hear from Jake McLean. Jake is an environmental engineer with a master's degree and specialization in hydrology and water resources. And what Jake is going to tell you is that as this project is currently designed, and this doesn't have anything to do with the permits that they will have to obtain, but what this design project shows, as it's been presented to the board, will increase flooding, not only for the church that's on the property, but for adjoining property owners that are upstream and downstream. It will increase both the rise in the flooding as well as the velocity of the water that's coming down. That the increase in velocity in water coming down the stream will contribute to increased erosion along those properties and create damage to those properties. You're going to hear from him and how he talks about that the design of the project is going to decrease water quality because of the increase in nutrients, sediment, and other controls as it's currently designed. And you're going to hear from him talking about the risk that that poses to safety for those who use the creek and the greenway that adjoins this development. You're also going to hear from Hartwell Carson. Hartwell is the French Broad River keeper. It is Hartwell's job to monitor water quality in the tributaries up to the French Broad, which Hominy Creek is. He's going to talk to you about the water quality impacts of the development and the damage that it's going to cause. You're also going to hear from 2 traffic engineers that are professors at North Carolina State University's doctorates in civil engineering about issues with the traffic impact analysis that has been provided to the board and the increased delays and queues that will be caused as a result of this project. And then lastly, we will present evidence from Devin Chapman, who is an appraiser here in town, who has looked at specific properties that adjoin this development and the impact that the development will have on their property values. Again, the role of the board is very simple. Have they proven that they meet each of these conditions? And we will show that they have not, and in particularly the first two, the health and safety and injury to adjoining and neighboring properties. Our first witness is going to be Kate Millar. Kate, if you'll come up, please.
And just so I'm clear, are we still doing the kind of modified cross-examination standard, or are we switching back to traditional rules?
We're still doing the modified method.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand. State your name.
Kate Millar.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I am, at this point, I have a copy of our presentation, which is also being provided up on the screen. I'd like to mark that as exhibit. I think we're at G, is that right?
Yeah.
That's correct.
And I'd ask that it be admitted into evidence.
Max, if we could have the presentation on the screen.
Opposing counsel, do you have any comments? I don't know that I can admit it at this point, but at the appropriate time, we'll consider that. Do you have any thoughts until then?
I've had an opportunity to look at this. At this time, I don't have any questions about it.
Okay, Ms. Millar, can you tell us where you live?
I live in Malvern Hills. My address is 19 Cranford Road.
And approximately how far away from the development is your home?
It's less than half a mile.
And do you have any involvement with the Malvern Hills Neighborhood Association?
I do. I've served on our neighborhood association board for the last 2 years, and I'm the incoming president for the next 2 years.
And have you been authorized to testify on behalf of the association today?
Yes, I have.
And I think you previously submitted an affidavit to the board in support of the association?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you review the TIA prepared on behalf of the developer, the traffic impact analysis?
Yes.
Okay. And how far is the proposed, if I can, I'll point you to the clicker.
Or click to then click this way to the computer.
There we go. Is this, Kate, can you see the exhibit here that's number 8 in our presentation, page 8?
I can see it.
Okay. And is this a representation of the homeowners association?
It is.
And the blue star that's on that map, can you tell us what that is, identify where that is in relationship to the development?
That blue star is at the intersection of Wendover, Bear Creek, and Sand Hill Roads, and it's about 1/10 of a mile from the proposed development.
Okay. And so properties within your HOA are right across or along South Bear Creek Road, correct?
There are, yes, along Bear Creek Road and along Wendover Road. The closest one is in this drawing. It's labeled 32, and it's on Wendover.
And is that intersection 7 in the TIA?
I think so.
And can you tell me what, and we're now on page 9 of the presentation, what does the blue star on that page represent?
That's the same intersection. That's where that house is that we're talking about.
That's part of your homeowners association?
Yes.
Okay. Did you consult with a traffic engineer as part of your review of this project?
Yes.
And what concerns did that leave the homeowners association with based on that consultation?
We have concerns about delays here, volume here, speed here.
Okay. Do you or any of the association members use the greenway, the city's greenway?
We do. We use it frequently.
And tell me how y'all use that.
We use it for all kinds of recreation uses. We walk there, we run there, we take our dogs there, we take our kids there. Our kids go there with their schools. Some people have tried to float there. You can paddleboard there sometimes. You go to the beach. It's a regular part of our neighborhood's recreation.
Are kids or anyone else swimming in the water on Hominy Creek?
Yes, kids do swim there.
In general, do you have any experience with development yourself?
I do.
Okay, can you describe for the board what that is?
Sure. I'm involved through my husband and business partners in development, single-family home.
Okay. Can you talk about at the intersections that we see here on Bear Creek and Wendover and Sand Hill, and then the one that's Sand Hill and South Bear Creek, what kind of traffic do you presently observe in those areas?
Presently, it's a misaligned intersection and people don't know when it's their turn to go. That creates a problem. We already have backups that happen basically every day at rush hours.
Mr. Chairman, one question. I was under the impression we would be receiving expert testimony, and I don't have any objection to receiving this, but if it's going to be duplicative of the expert testimony, I would prefer to hear from that first.
This will just be factual testimony that we will not be asking our experts about. They will be making opinions based on the factual testimony. But
To the extent that it's her observations, I'm fine with it. Let's avoid words like misaligned, crosswalk. That would fall in the realm of expert testimony.
Kate, I am marking an exhibit here, H. Can you identify what's in this exhibit?
This exhibit is a drone photograph of the intersection of South Bear Creek and Sand Hill Road that was taken approximately a month ago.
This is in tab 4 of your binders for the board. And just go through the whole packet, Kate, if you don't mind. It's one collective exhibit.
Okay. The next photo shows both intersections, South Bear Creek, Sand Hill on your right, and on the left you can see Sand Hill, Wendover, Bear Creek intersection.
And what's the status? Do you know what times these photos were taken?
I believe they were taken between 4 and 6 p.m.
And what kind of traffic do we see in these photos on those roads?
This is a typical backup that you would see. The cars are all queued waiting at these intersections.
And can you talk about the rest of the photos in that exhibit and describe for the board what you're seeing?
The next one moves on to in front of the church and along South Bear Creek Road in front of the houses there. That's the queue for the intersection of Sand Hill Road and South Bear Creek.
And at that point, is it past the church at that point?
It's past the church. It's often all the way back to the interstate bridge there.
Are there any other photos in that exhibit that you could describe for the board?
The next one is that same queue. And again.
Okay. I'd ask that this be admitted into evidence as Exhibit H.
Who took these photos?
These photos were taken by a neighbor.
Someone in your HOA?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have some hesitancy with that, only in the sense that we don't have any context of the time when they were taken, the events, if there was a special event at the church. I'm not trying to deny that traffic is an issue, but I think we've been very intentional about trying to keep this as expert testimony that can be quantified and that can be cross-examined on that. So I'm hesitant to want to accept something when we have no way to know the context of when that was taken.
I do think Ms. Millar testified as to the time in that, and I can ask her again, do you know when these photos were taken?
Well, and she's competent to testify as to her personal observations, but she said that a neighbor, that these photographs were taken by a neighbor with a drone, and so she has no personal knowledge of this.
She can identify what's in the photos, and as such, she's authenticated what they are to her knowledge, and that is factual testimony that she can provide.
So what I hear you saying is that this is intended to be an illustrative exhibit then, not, I'm a little confused as to what purpose we're considering these for. If there's a limited foundation under which she can offer it, I mean, she can say what her neighbor told her, right? I mean, but the person themselves is not here. Can I ask you, Ms. Millar, were you informed that they were taken between 4 and 6? Is that?
I just heard they were taken at 4:40 PM.
And that's hearsay.
We didn't,
The person who was there is in the room.
To avoid any legal issue, if they're objecting to it, I think there's a proper way to introduce it without any ambiguity.
if they're objecting to it, we'll ask the individual who took the photos to come up and deal with that. But to finish up with Ms. Millar, can you also, I'm marking what's been labeled as Exhibit I. Tab 3 within the binders. Can you identify what's in Exhibit I, Ms. Millar?
These are photographs that I took of Hominy Creek.
And what's depicted in those photos?
It shows the stream bank on the side of the proposed development.
Okay. What in these photos do you see related to erosion along the stream bank?
I see erosion all the way down.
Okay. We'd ask that these photos be admitted as Exhibit I. These are photos taken by Ms. Millar. She's provided that foundation. This relates to the quality of the stream bank on the property and from the adjoining properties.
Counsel?
No objection to these photographs.
Any board member input? Otherwise, I'd admit them.
Do we know who took these?
She took them.
She did. I'm okay with it.
And given we had not made a determination as to the previous exhibit, do you still want this labeled Exhibit I? Just for record-keeping purposes?
I don't have any further questions for Ms. Millar.
Questions from the applicant's attorney?
My understanding is you were going to wait till the end, but
Yes.
At this point, I'd ask Mike Hill. Mike's here. Yep. Mike, what's your full name?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Raise your right hand. State your name.
Michael Hill.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Hill, where do you live?
I live just across the way from this intersection, probably 300 or 400 yards up the hill on Emory Road.
And when you say this intersection, which intersection?
The intersection at South Bear Creek, Sand Hill Road, Wendover.
Okay. And I'm going to hand you what's been previously marked as Exhibit H. Are you familiar with the photos in Exhibit H?
Yes, this was on October 25th at about 4:40 p.m. It was a Friday afternoon. There was nothing going on at the church. On my behalf, a friend, an alumni of Asheville School, which is just right up the hill, came down with me. I drove him to the spot, and he has the actual drone. I was standing there the entire time. He took these photos that you see now.
And was Ms. Millar's description of what's in those photos accurate?
Yes, completely accurate.
Okay. At this point, I'd ask that it be admitted as Exhibit H.
Any objection?
Let me ask Mr. Hill one question. Do you know what altitude these photos were taken from?
I do not know the exact altitude. I mean, the drone was very visible, just a few hundred, probably 150 to 200 feet perhaps is an estimate.
I have no other questions.
They're so admitted. I think we can determine at the appropriate time, what weight to give them, given the circumstances, but it's admissible.
At this point, we'd call Carolyn Warren. I think they'll swear you in, Carolyn.
Raise your right hand. State your name.
Carolyn Warren.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And if I could have my presentation popped up back on the screen, please, Josh.
Max, do you mind pulling the presentation back up, please, sir?
Thank you. Good evening, Miss Warren. Where do you live?
I live at 460 Sand Hill Road.
And how long have you lived there?
10 years.
And I'm going to ask you to look. Here we go. The blue star that is on in our presentation on page 20. Can you tell me what that is?
That's my property.
Okay. And you're immediately adjacent to the proposed development, correct?
Correct.
And you border Hominy Creek with your property?
Yes.
Okay. And what is this we see in slide 21?
My house.
Can you tell us which one?
It's the white one between the purple and the yellow.
What's in the backyard there?
The creek.
Okay. Well, the creek's in the backyard. Do you have anything on your property in the backyard?
I do. I have fenced-in property. I have play equipment for my 2 children and a trampoline and an Airstream.
And how old are your children?
4 and 7.
Okay. And did you review the application and site plans for this proposed development?
Yes.
And what concerns did you have related to the development? Related to your property specifically?
Mainly 3 concerns. There was flooding issues, quality of life, and health and safety.
And when you say health and safety, are you referring to water quality or what in particular?
Yes.
Okay.
And financial, also property value.
Did you have or consult with an environmental engineer on your concerns about flooding in this case?
No.
Did I do that for you?
Yes, I read the report.
And did that report confirm your concerns about flooding for your property?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Does your family use the greenway that's on the city's property nearby?
Yes, many times a week.
And how do y'all use that?
Recreation.
Specifically?
So we walk on it. When the water is clean, we swim in the water.
Okay. Have you ever consulted with any, I guess, publications on water quality for Hominy Creek in making that decision on whether you're going to swim in it or not?
Yes.
And tell us about that. What is that?
Well, I frequently use an app on my phone that's a swim guide.
And what does that guide tell you?
So it tells me the quality of the water and if it's swimmable or not.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for Ms. Warren.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Warren.
Our next witness would be Jolene Elkins.
Just for planning purposes, Mr. Noor, how many witnesses do you have in this vein?
So these are just, again, basic information for the clients. This is Ms. Elkins. We have Mr. Corpening afterwards, and that's the 2 there. And then I have expert witnesses after that point. Good evening, Ms. Elkins.
Oh,
I think they'll
sorry.
want to swear you in.
Yep. Raise your right hand. State your name.
Jolene Elkins.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Ms. Elkins, what property do you own that's near the proposed development?
51 South Bear Creek Road.
Okay. And if you could look at the monitor, I'm showing what's slide 19 in our presentation. What's the blue star represent?
That's my property.
Okay. And what is it immediately across from that's within the proposed development?
Would be the storage buildings.
Okay. Forgive me. And did you review the traffic impact analysis that was submitted in
did.
support? And in which direction is your property towards I-240 and I-40 compared to the new entrance of the development?
Yes.
And how long, I just want to talk, we talked a little bit with the DOT engineers about this, but how long have you lived in and around Asheville?
I've grew up here. I was born in Asheville.
And you know, do you know how long they've been talking about the STIP project that is discussed in the TIA?
At least 15, 20 years. Because when we first bought the property, when I first bought the property in '03, they were talking about it, and we were looking at, with DOT, at how much of our property they might take, because one proposal took almost all of my property.
Okay. Have you been approached by property acquisition individuals for the STIP project at this point?
No.
Okay.
I think the latest proposal takes part of the property.
And when you reviewed the proposed site, what concerns did you have related to your property with the proposed development?
Mainly traffic, because we already hit traffic, and if you add the number of apartments that they're talking about plus retail space, I just don't see a two-lane road handling it, even with the 100 feet or so of turning lane.
I'm going to need to object to that. That's the province of an expert.
To the extent that it's opinion testimony, you can rephrase your question.
Your concern was about traffic. I
My
think
concern
that's-
is traffic.
That was what we were wanting to talk about.
And safety.
Okay. And I'm gonna, sorry. Can you identify what's in slide 40 of our presentation?
That's the current view across the street from me now.
So that's that's standing on your property, looking out over your current view?
Yes.
Okay. And what will be there if the proposed development is approved?
3 or 4 story storage building, and then behind that, the other buildings, I think it was a senior citizen.
So you'll lose this view?
I will lose that view.
Okay.
Which is the primary reason I purchased the property.
Okay. I don't have any more questions from Ms. Elkins.
Could I make 2 statements of fact? Just one related to this. If you would turn to your map that was handed to you by the development. I just want to make sure you understand the roads. I know expert testimony has been provided, but you all know what a 2-lane road looks like. And the intersections were well studied in what I looked at, being with Brevard Road and South Bear Creek and the intersections we've talked about. But if you realize every road to get to this project is a 2-lane road, there is no way. The adjacent to 240 is literally that. It's just adjacent to. There is no access from 240 without going up to Brevard Road, down Brevard Road, and then a mile down South Bear Creek Road. I just want the board to understand that concept. And then also they talked about inviting public comment. I have the letter that was sent to me dated September 23rd, which I received, I think, September 26th for the September 30th meeting. And that was the first I knew of this project. Short time frame. I received the second notice the day before Thanksgiving for the December 2nd meeting, which was the Monday after Thanksgiving, and we already had plans to be out of town. So, yes, they have public meetings, but very short notice.
I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you.
Our next one would be Bennett Corpening. I think you've already been sworn in today, so we won't do
I
that
have.
again. Mr. Corpening, your mother owns 152 Shelbourne Road, correct?
Correct.
And can you tell me where that is in relationship to the development? I don't have.
Across the creek.
Okay. To the east?
To the east.
What concern, did you review the proposed development and the site plans, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay. What concerns did you have related to your property, related to the development?
The size of the buildings, location of the buildings, the fact that Mom's house is unique in that it's down close to the creek, and basically we're going to be looking up at these large buildings to the west.
What is your current view to the west?
Yeah, it's the Mount Pisgah.
Okay. And based on your review of the proposed development, will you maintain that view or you lose it?
Lose it. What we'll see is the buildings.
No further questions for Mr. Corpening.
Any questions on the board? All right. Thank you, Mr. Corpening. So I'm imagining your next couple witnesses are experts.
Everybody's an expert from now on out.
It's been a theme, huh? Now it's appropriate time to take a break.
Yep.
Okay.
To cross-examine those witnesses first.
I'll give you the right to do that. I would hate to rush you if you would like extra time. Do you have a strong insistence that you want to cross-examine them now? Or did you intend on waiting till after the experts anyway?
I was planning to wait until, as long as they're here, and if they're not, that's their testimony in chief, you disregard it, but.
If you can instruct your witnesses to stay. I don't imagine they're leaving at this point.
I don't think they are either. Well, the only person that's really not within none of them are in my control, but Mr. Hill is not a client, so I would just say to Mr. Hill, if you don't mind staying, you did testify.
So I just so everyone knows from a legal standpoint, there would be some serious problems if you left and we didn't have the chance to cross-examine for both sides out of fairness. So just keep that in mind. Please don't leave. We're not going to be that long. Okay? 20 minutes?
Yep. 10 minutes.